I shall move very quickly to the PowerPoint and share my screen, which is here. So, as Krakow just said, presentation is 5 points, but the late, great Francis Kiddle used to say it's 5 points going on 50, and there's a certain amount of truth in that. So, it took me a long time to find this rotating globe GIF, even longer to figure out how to slow it down, but there we are. That's the whole world of philately in front of us. So hello to all of you wherever you are in the world, or to put it another way, to all of you wherever you are in the world, hello, or wherever you are in the world, hello to all of you, and wherever you are in the world, to all of you, hello. Each of these sentences uses the same words. They're all different, and the key thing is they're all right. And one of the important things about exhibiting is that making an exhibit is like that. We begin with our material, and then what we do is we make that our own by presenting it in a form which seems right to us. Now, presentation, a little care goes a long, long way in presentation, and it's very important, in my opinion, to experiment, to try out things, and gradually to work out what works for you. And I just want to start by saying, just because this is how I do it, it doesn't mean that this is the way to do it, or this is the right way to do it, or there's only one way to do it. What you have to do as an exhibitor is to create your style and make it your own. Now, this little table here has been stolen from Jorn Jornsson, who's a Grand Prix winner in Singapore a few years ago and a very fine postal historian. And he divided the points up between cheap points and expensive points. And the cheap points come for presentation. You can't buy presentation and knowledge, and you can't buy knowledge and research. But presentation, knowledge, and research together are 40 points. And then treatment is another 20. And treatment is the way you tell your story. So that makes 60 points. And condition is your judgment, also your wallet, if we remember what Henrik told us last week. But the key thing here is that when you're making an exhibit, a lot of it is in your control. It isn't because you can't buy the material. It is simply that you need to figure out how to present your material as best as you can to allow the material to speak for itself. Presenting your exhibit badly can cost you a lot more than just 5 points. And we don't want exhibitors standing in front of the frames looking like this. So exhibiting, about half the points are for the material you show, and half the points are for your philatelic expertise and skill in creating an exhibit. So what you show is 50%, and how you're showing it is the other 50%. And presentation colours this whole 50%. Now, in 2001, my wife and I made our first exhibit in a foreign country, i.e. outside the United Kingdom. And this was at Hafnia in Denmark, Copenhagen. And we treasure our bronze medal. Bronze medals are quite hard to get, you know. And we got a bronze medal at Hafnia 2001. And it was only then that I realized there were rules. And it was a revelation to me. So there are the GREVs. These are the general regulations of the FIP for the evaluation of competitive exhibits at FIP exhibitions. And if you haven't read them, you're not going to succeed as an exhibitor. I didn't even know what the FIP was. And the FIP in exhibiting internationally is the key body. So you need to get onto the FIP website, you need to read the regulations, and you need to understand them. And this is the other part of the rules, if you like, from the FIP, the special regulations for different exhibiting classes. So this is for the evaluation of postal history exhibits. And these rules or regulations are incredibly flexible. If you read them through, you will be surprised. If you haven't read them recently, you should read them, because they are enabling and generous in what you're allowed to do. And as Andrew said at the very beginning, the FIP website has all of this material, and you simply have to look up the regulations on the FIP website. And what it says is that presentation requires an evaluation of the overall aesthetic appearance of the exhibit. The overall aesthetic appearance of the exhibit. So actually you have to look at your exhibit as a whole, not just as an individual page or the write-up for an individual item. It's the entire exhibit which is the basis of judging its presentation. And this phrase is used in the Grevs. It says that writing up should be clear, concise, and relevant. It doesn't incidentally say it should be short. And the method of presentation should show the material to the best effect. And the whole exhibit should show balance in time, in material, and in appearance. And a lot of exhibitors fail on the time one, incidentally, but that's a different issue. And you have to remember that you might know everything there is to know about your subject, but at an exhibition, you're not there to speak for your exhibit. So the way it's constructed, the way it looks, is crucially important, because your exhibit has to speak for itself, because it's all you have in the frames. You're not there to explain. Some exhibits are pretty untidy. And I've had people at the frame say to me, but I've got everything. Well, you've got everything, and this person who owns this room has got everything, but we don't know where it is. That's another way of looking after your life. Or this. Or this. And what you have to do is to create a form in which you are comfortable and in which you're confident that your exhibit can speak for itself. And I'm not really a great fan of Jackson Pollock, but there we are. So you need to make sure that it says what you want it to say. So why does presentation matter? Because if an exhibit is not attractive, if it is not organized, if it's not coherent, if it's not balanced, and it's not complete, a judge might start with the idea that it's not likely to be very good. It's an exaggeration, but it's fatal to ignore. So, a fundamental principle of exhibit construction is coherence and structure. If there's no coherent and structured approach to presentation and layout, then your treatment won't be coherent and structured, and it'll be hard for the jury to understand. And I can't make this point strongly enough. The way in which you present your exhibit actually allows you to treat it properly. Treatment and presentation are irrevocably linked. They have to fit together. So presentation is not just about layout. It it's about the choice of material. Is it aesthetically pleasing, in good condition, interesting to look at, and so on and so on and so on. Does it take the story forward? So your choice of material is part of your presentation. Everything about creating an exhibit, everything about the way in which you present it underpins the treatment and the way in which your story is going to be understood by the jury. So balance. You have to be, each page has to balance in itself. Some people like to be a little bit different, a little bit unusual, and that's fine. But believe you me, red pages for an exhibit doesn't do anybody any good. You need to allow the material to speak. You don't need to bury the material in the way in which it looks. But it's not just the page. Each frame has to be balanced within itself. Some people like double sheets because it allows more movement of pieces on the pages, allows better placement of key items in appropriate positions. And then there's the balance of the material in the exhibit itself, with no large chronological gaps. The postal history of Vienna, 1465 to 1920. And the first item is from 1465, and the next item is from 1726. This is all about choice, all about the way in which you present the totality of the exhibit. So, some pages. These are 2 pages of mine, and you can see that the material, as is often the case in postal history, is of different sizes and different, different colors and different sizes. And these are all redirected letters. So what have I done? I've got a balance, as you can see, with a map on the left and a map on the right and 2 maps in the center. The material has a common top line and the material has a common bottom line, and it looks aesthetically pleasing, at least I think it does. So you have to balance your pages, and then your pages have to balance with each other. Here's a frame. And you can see again, not only does the material balance more or less, it's sometimes not possible. The maps are mirror images of each other. The maps reflect each other across the page. And your material has to balance within the frame. And it's not just the material and maps which should balance, but images. Down there on the bottom row, second from the right, is a scan of the back. Why is that there? Well, partly it's there to make the page up. Partly it's there to create balance within the frame. So it's not just your material philatelic or your material maps and explanations or your material in terms of the text boxes and the write-up. It's everything on the page has to balance so that it's aesthetically pleasing across the frame itself. Here's another frame, very tricky frame this, because I've got pieces of very differing size. Second row far right is a postal law. Third row, middle 2 are small folded letters from the early part of the 19th century. And then there are large pieces on the bottom left and the bottom right. And I've tried to balance them. So in the second row, the left-hand page and the right-hand page balance each other. So pages need to balance within the frame, and it's almost impossible to make it perfect. And as postal historians, recognizing that material comes in many sizes, we have to compromise a bit. Your exhibit needs to be cohesive. So you have to decide at the outset, are you having page frames? They're a bad idea in my opinion, because they constrain the material. Are you going to have running headers? Some exhibitors like flags and coats of arms. Some exhibitors hate them. Some judges like them and some judges hate them. What are you going to do about mounts, your mounts and your matting? What are you going to do about your fonts? When are you going to use bold? When are you going to use italic lettering? What sort of paper are you going to use? What sort of protectors are you going to use? I've seen exhibits of very fine material with protectors which don't offer any support at all. And I think that's an insult to the material. What colors are you going to use? How are you going to standardize or make harmonious your illustrations and maps? I draw nearly all my maps based on the same original outline. So how much are you going to write up? What's the effect of that going to have visually on your page, on your frame? Where are you going to locate your key items in the frame? How are you going to draw attention to them? Where are your chapters going to begin? Where does your story start? Where does it end? Do you end at the bottom of a page, bottom of a frame? Do you end on the right-hand side of a frame? Do you split your story so it breaks across a row? These are all issues which you have to think about almost before you take your exhibit, before you start writing up your pages. What about white spaces? Some exhibitors like lots of white space. Some exhibitors think that too many white spaces shows that you don't have enough material. You have to have a view on these things. How do you draw attention to key items? All of these are presentational points because they help you to carry your treatment forward. Paper and print. So why is this important? Well, the paper demonstrates knowledge of conservation, and it shows concern for and pride in the material. I mean, you see some exhibits where all of the energy has gone into the material and none of the energy has gone into the story. And you see this in some very expensive, very high quality exhibits material, and these are let down by a lack of concern and pride in the way in which it's put together. So paper. Are you going to use A4 or A3 or the US equivalents? I've said before that A3 gives more flexibility. Should be acid free, free of lignin and ground wood. What color is the paper going to be? I personally, I think commercial white papers, which you see in some exhibits still, really detract from the material, particularly postal history. White paper with optical brighteners really does overshadow, literally, the material in some exhibits. But you have to make your choices. How heavy is the paper? And I would say the best your printer can take. What about the protectors? Well, Melinex, Mylar, without surface coatings or plasticizers, because you will, in time, damage your material if you use the wrong stuff. But these are all presentational issues. So our page sizes vary. Deutsche Industry Norm is used everywhere apart from North America. And standard album page sizes vary. And the thing you need to bear in mind is this, that exhibition frame sizes also vary. You can go to an exhibition in one country and the frame is of a particular size. You go to another and the frame is different. You don't necessarily know which frames are going to be used in which country or what the size is going to be. And you need to make sure that you choose a paper size which is going to allow presentation of your material to be effective wherever it's shown. How many times have you seen exhibits where the bottom of a page is overlapped by the page in the row below? And what happens is that the exhibitor says, well, the exhibitor says, that's the fault of the exhibition. Look what they've done to my material. Well, I'm sorry, you've done that to your material by not taking into account the issue of frame sizes at the very beginning. My pages are 288 millimeters high, and they seem to fit pretty much everywhere. So do you put frames around your items? What color are they going to be? You need to experiment. Do you use card of contrasting colors for matting? You get very elaborate mattings with different colors for different levels of rarity in some exhibits. And I have to tell you, I find that confusing. One color for rarity is fine, but 3 or 4 or 5 I've seen on one exhibit are hopeless. And I said frames around pages can lead to problems. And beginner exhibitors quite often put frames around the pages because they look good, but they don't look good when you run out of space for your material. What about the typeface? Well, it needs to be clear and easy to read. And one of the mixed blessings of modern media is that we all have 500 different typefaces available in our programs. And please don't mix too many different typefaces. It's better to use the same typeface and then to vary the point size for headings or subheadings or texts or explanations, and to use bold or italics for variations. But again, these are all decisions that you need to make so that you can be uniform on your pages. There's nothing worse than seeing a page which has got, all of a sudden, it's in Times New Roman when the rest of the exhibit is using Gill Sans, for example. What about my print color? Well, you've got to remember, first of all, that if you use red or black, sorry, if you use red or green, you may be confusing some judges. I would recommend black or a very dark color. I use brown on cream paper, which I think suits the period that I normally exhibit. I've got to tell you, there are judges who don't like that, but you know, this is your exhibit and you've got to make your own mind up. What about headers and footers? Well, this really is the key set of choices about how you present your material. And I'm going to spend a little time explaining this. So I use headers on the left-hand side with a subheading usually, and on the right I use another smaller heading for subtitles, and I'll show you some of these in a moment. I often use a footer, sometimes with the exhibit title and a page number at the bottom right. We are supposed to put page numbers on the front of our pages. It's one of the regulations. Many people don't. And believe me, if you're putting exhibitions up in the frames, if you're putting an exhibit up in the frames and you get it out of order, it's easier to fix if you've got the numbers on the bottom right. I used to use footers with the exhibition title, but you have to change that too often, and I just now use the exhibit title. And the point size, well, I use large and or capital letters for headers and smaller, lighter colors for footers, for example, a gray tone. The key thing is that your material stands out and not your text necessarily. Now, all of these choices show concern for and pride in your material. This is perhaps, I quite like my presentation to be modest and not to shout at you. Again, I've seen successful exhibitors who do shout, "Look at me," on some of their most important pages. But there are other ways of doing this, as Henrik Moritzen showed us last week. Don't be too fancy. You will detract from your material. You need to help the material to speak for itself. So, this is what I do. I use Microsoft Word. Some people use Publisher, some people use InDesign. I use Microsoft Word, which is, I think, very flexible. I use a page size which is called Clarendon, which is 288 millimeters high and 218 millimeters wide. So it's shorter than an A4, shorter than American letter, and it's wider than A4. I have standardized margins almost entirely throughout the exhibit. Occasionally you're pushed and you have to make a change. So I've got a 2 centimeter top margin, 1.5 on either the left-hand side and the right-hand side, and 1.5 at the bottom. These are the fonts that I use. I use Gill Sans at 12 point. Point size is really important. If you have made the choice to get more text in at 8 or 9 point, or even 10 point, quite often you're going to make it impossible for the juror to read. If you look especially at the top and the bottom rows in a 16-page frame, it's easier in Austria and Germany where there are 12-page frames, but there are more 16-page frames around the world. So you have to choose your font size, and please make it readable. So I use Gill Sans at 12 point, and then for various other reasons, I use Times New Roman, Arial, something called Bible Script, and Fracture. It doesn't matter what fonts you use, as long as you're modest with the number you choose and that you're regular with using them throughout, you're consistent. And at the bottom, I'm sorry, a little hard to see, is a footer. So, I said at the beginning that you use your presentation to support your treatment. Okay, top left-hand corner, I have the Danish Post Office beyond the monarchy. That's a text box using Microsoft Word. I don't put lines around it because I think it's clearer to have no line. It is justified left to the margin, and it is 1 centimeter below the top of the page. And it's always the chapter heading, and it refers back to my plan. More on that later. I never begin a chapter in the middle of a row, except when I do, because it's inevitable. But 99% of the time, I don't begin a chapter in the middle of the row. Then on the right-hand side, also a text box, also with no line, and it's right to the margin. and it's 1.3 centimeters below the top of the page. I know this is all perhaps a little bit boring, but I do this with all of my pages and all of my exhibits. And whether you like it or not, it does produce good results. I learned this from Bob Odenweller in the United States many years ago. He walked me through some exhibits and he said, this is a good way of doing this stuff, Chris. And I'm very grateful to Bob for that. And what I do with the right-hand text box is I describe in one line each of the items on the page. So it says Rendsburg in the Schleswig Postal area, Rendsburg in the National for Riesbank Skilling area. And the top line there refers to the first item and the bottom line refers to the second item. It also tells if they're important. I'll come again to that shortly. Then I've got a text box at the bottom of the page. It's no line. Its size is from margin to margin. So it's 218 millimeters less 30. And it's justified to my bottom margin. And then I put a box for my pieces of postal history. Again, it's got no line, this box. It can have a line, it's up to you. And the height and width of this box is 0.5 centimeters wider than the item being shown, so they're all measured. And it's centered 2.5 centimeters below the top of the page, except when that's not possible. And then I've got another text box with my write-up for the first item. Again, width is margin to margin, it has no line. And then there's an X box, the bounding box I'm calling it here, which is for my second piece, if I've got a second piece. And of course, you can use these boxes for the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth pieces on a page. It's up to you. And then what I do is I take the 4 pieces and I justify them vertically. So what happens is that the top line, where the top of the arrow is pointing, is the same on every page. And the bottom line, which is where the bottom end of the arrow is pointing, is the same on every page. But the position of the boxes in between varies from page to page to allow spacing for the material. Four items on this particular page. It can be more, it just gets more complicated. And what this does is it avoids the problem of tram lines or train tracks where all of the items run in a straight line across all of the pages. It's almost impossible unless you're exhibiting postal stationery to do that sort of thing with postal history. And I find this is flexible enough to allow nearly everything I've ever tried to exhibit to be exhibited. So it makes for a balanced page in the first instance. So here's a frame. And you can see the lines, whoops, the lines there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. The bottom line is the bottom line. And each line indicates that the top row is consistent. And what this allows is for your page to begin with to actually have a balanced structure. So it gives cohesion to the individual pages within the frame. Okay, so my chapter headings across the page and on each row show where you are in my treatment. You can use subheadings if they help in these chapter heading boxes, but they lead the judge through your exhibit. They exemplify your treatment. And you can see I've got, there's a chapter 16, redirected and rerouted mail, which is also in the second row, also in the third row. But then I begin a new chapter, 17, the second armistice period, 20th of July 1864 to the peace treaty in Vienna, 16th of November 1864, and then that continues. So here are a chapter heading, one, the Danish post office beyond the monarchy, and a subheading, the Duchy of Schleswig and city of Lübeck. And on the right-hand side of the same page is my explanation box or whatever, and it says, for Riksbankskilling, first day of use in Schleswig, Lecture Tonden. And then the second item on the page is a numeral cancel, number 3 for Lübeck, on the 4 Riksbankskilling printed by Fairslip. And the little red tick is my way of saying this is an important piece. So you have a chapter heading, and then you have the detail of your treatment on the right-hand side of every page. And that goes through every page in every exhibit that I make. So the information boxes on the right are the detail of the story, short one-liners to show the judge the material. And you should be able to follow an exhibit through the whole of the 8 frames or 5 frames by looking at the chapter headings and reading the information boxes. That's a really important way to allow the jury to see what your treatment is and to understand it. And it means they don't have to read much of everything else. What they'll do is they'll do spot checks. So as I say, they can demonstrate importance or draw attention to variety, but it should be possible to understand the whole exhibit from these headings and subheadings. So here's my plan of an 8-frame exhibit. And I try to keep that very simple too. So frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, and so on, and my page numbers, and then these are my chapter headings. So you will find these texts appearing in the left-hand top box on each of the pages which come into the exhibit itself. So you need to try to keep flexibility because you're going to add material to your exhibit probably as time goes on, so you don't want to tie yourself down. You don't want to overcomplicate your structure because then it becomes very hard to add material or to vary material. You don't want to make your title page a history lesson, and postal historians are given to making title pages history lessons. Your title page has to be about your exhibit and about the material in your exhibit, not a history lesson. And you need to look to see what other exhibitors do. Plagiarize, plagiarize, plagiarize. It doesn't really matter who's had the idea. If it works and they're getting and they're successful, don't plagiarize from people who are failing, but you want to go and look at the best exhibits, go and look at the medal winners, the gold medal winners and the large gold medal winners. You can forget about going to look at the Grand Prix winners in some cases, because sometimes that's more complicated than the way in which they've set their material out and the way in which they've structured it. But look at successful exhibitors at every exhibition, walk the exhibition with the Palmares in your hand and look to see what other people do and steal it. So here we have one of my pages. The heading is in the plan, which you saw there, which I'm showing again on the right-hand side, is the same as the heading on the page. As you can see, I use color. Believe me, they are blue. I'm sorry about that, but I use the color to show the text. It saves me writing 4-ring blue mute canceller. I save a word. It gives me economy. The typeface in the text is the same as the typeface in the date stamp. This is why I use Times New Roman. The date is in bold. The date structure is always the same. DD, MYM, YYY. It doesn't matter what your date structure is, but please don't vary it throughout the exhibit. All philatelists are pedants, and it can be very annoying. This says this is an important piece. And manuscript in the text, that's my Bible script, means manuscript in the item. So you can see Franco and Franco. I use the same conventions whichever exhibit I'm making. Why do I do this? Because when you've taught the judge what conventions you're using, you don't have to do it again and again and again. A judge will find it easier to judge a well-structured exhibit, a consistent exhibit, than one which is not well-structured and which is inconsistent. If you're lucky, you're going to get 15 minutes from a judge, although they will have the introductory page for advanced preparation, which is why it doesn't need to be a history lesson. It's got to be about your exhibit. I use isolated single lines sometimes to draw attention to rarity. So, presentation is closely related to treatment. And I said at the beginning, this is because this is how I do it, it doesn't mean that this is the way or the right way, or there's only one way. You need to create a style and make it your own. So, thank you for your attention. I hope that's been of some help. And if you want to contact me, chris.king@postalhistory.net. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Chris. Right. Okay. Thank you, Chris, for giving us such a wonderful talk of how to arrange exhibits. I have actually seen Chris exhibits many times, and it is wonderful, wonderful, and it conveys everything to the judges. I have actually got some questions here. There are two questions from Graham Winters. The first question is, what does FIP think of handwritten exhibits? And the second one is, how transferable are postal history presentation comments across classes? Chris, any comments?
Surely. The FIP, read the regulations, because it says specifically that handwritten exhibits should not be penalized. Having said that, you've always got the human factor. But the rule is that handwritten exhibits should not be penalized. How transferable are these? I think they're quite transferable to most classes. I think really the basic rules apply right across the piece. You're going to get differences if you're producing an open exhibit, for example, and you're going to get differences if you're producing a thematic exhibit. But the rules about balance and clarity and consistency are the same in every class. So yes, I think they're quite transferable, but not quite necessarily.
I think, to be honest, with, say, for example, open class or 2C, I think you do need much more balancing because of you have addition of a non-philatelic material. Therefore, if you have put some huge map or something, then you probably need a little bit balancing.
Well, do you know, 2C,
just postal history showing two covers or three covers.
having additional material in 2C, which is to help to carry the exhibit forward, help to carry the treatment forward, really helps you balance things in the pages. Because sometimes you have this rather unfortunate gap, and you can sometimes find something which fits the gap beautifully, which carries the story forward. So yeah, I'm a great fan of 2C.
I know. Okay, I've got, I don't know whether this is a comment or question from Ari Muhonen. Said, do we have to be designers in order to make aesthetic presentations?
I'm not a designer, I'm a pedant. So no, I don't think you do. I think what you do really, if you can keep a tidy desk, you can make a decent exhibit. You don't want to look at my desk, it's a mess. It looks like picture one on the early in the presentation. But no, I don't think you do, but I do think you have to be careful. And all I've been saying is about care and consistency. And you do that anyway, Ari.
Okay, I've got another question from Mr. Warren. Say, when should you use a copy of the other side of a letter? For example, the censorship is on the back side, but the registered airmail cancels on the front because he wants to display the censorship mark.
You should use it where it's appropriate. I'm sorry, this is going to be one of these answers which isn't quite an answer. You don't want to show the back of something if it's not relevant. You don't want to show every postmark that's on the back if it's not relevant. But if it carries your treatment forward, you may very well want to do so. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have an exhibit which is only half an exhibit because every back of every piece is displayed. You really need to get as much material in the frame as you can, whilst maintaining clarity and balance. So where it's appropriate, do it. Where it's irrelevant, don't.
Okay. Right, I've got a question from Julian Jones. Can you talk about the problem with overlapping, especially people showing modern material? The size of the covers are much larger. So how what's the approach?
Well, you know, it's true in the 1940s as well. You get these official envelopes, and it's very, very hard. Why not overlap? Well, you don't want to overlap if the judge is going to, if the jury is going to think that you're hiding something. And it's tempting to overlap if you've got a missing corner, for example. But I think you overcome that if the quality of your material throughout the exhibit is good. So, in my opinion, there are occasions when you have no choice but to overlap. Depends what you're showing as well. I've stolen something from thematic philately, which is windowing. And if there's a particular piece of information you want to show, you can actually cut a window in your page and mount the thing on the back. But again, you could be hiding something. But then again, the jury could also have it taken out of the frame. So it's up to you. I think sometimes you do have to overlap. I think it's unavoidable, but I do think you should avoid it where possible.
Yes.
Or you can use A3. And you know, I missed out one page size, which is I've seen some very attractive exhibits where they use 3 pages across. So they're 1 1/3 times what might be thought of as an A4. So I think you should try to avoid it by varying your paper sizes. You can use different sizes of page in an exhibit. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think you should try hard not to overlap. If you're forced to, well, do it, but do it sparingly, and don't have any ratty material around it, because the jury might think that what you're doing is you're hiding things. Yeah.
Okay. So I've got a question from Paolo. Would the suggested presentation approach change in case of the full exhibit is available online to judges before the exhibition? As for example, virtual exhibition.
Yeah, sure. I don't think so. I don't think so. It still has to look attractive. I mean, you're right to raise the point, because, you know, if you can look at an exhibit page by page on a screen, I think it can be told differently. I think this is early days for many of us, and I've been thinking about virtual exhibits, and if it's page by page as though it was a flip book, you can tell the story differently. But then you've got to think about your chapter headings and your chapter endings. You've still got to think about balance on a page. So I think if we have virtual exhibits regularly, I think you might see the style change for virtual exhibits. I don't know, it's a really interesting question, and I'd be very interested to know what other people think. I think virtual exhibiting could alter exhibiting quite significantly. I have to say I don't really like virtual exhibiting for the same reason that I'm not that keen on overlapping, because you can hide things. It's really quite easy to brush things away using Photoshop. I like to see the real thing in the frame myself. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. So virtual exhibits, I think, might lead to a different skill set and a different approach.
I've got a question from Andrea Mori about text justification. Justified text looks overall neater, but sometimes you get problems when the lines need to be short. For example, on the side of an envelope or something, and there are longish words, so you're just going to get a kind of stagger.
No, I don't justify my text. I know exhibitors do, and I know exhibitors get Grand Prix with justified text, and they obviously vary their writing to make sure that they don't have any lines with 3 long gaps in or whatever. I don't justify. I do center, because that actually allows a balance in a different way. And I sometimes write justify text in a text box, because it just looks better that way. So, you know, it's your choice. It's like I said at the beginning, you've got to make your choices. It's your exhibit. And, you know, and that's the other thing. When a jury says, well, I don't like the way this looks, you have to think, well, is that right? Is that judge speaking for himself or herself, or is that a general truth? Because exhibits are our own things, and we have to do them our way. So justify it if you want to, justify it if you can justify it, and don't if you can't.
Okay, I've got a question from Paul Davey. Any thoughts on the best way to show non-rectangular items? They often stand out.
Oh God, yeah, with great difficulty. God, I hate things which are, you know, like, why couldn't people fold letters? Why couldn't people fold letters straight in the olden days? And yeah, those triangular letters, very, very attractive philately, but difficult sometimes on the page. And not only that, if you've got, I have tried to do this. You just have to do your best. you know, you can actually construct lines around an object. So I think a little more technical skill can help you. I don't like to see a rectangular box bounding something which is more of a parallelogram. So you end up with white spaces. So the trick there is to vary your box, and if you need to construct your box using different elements, well, you've got to do that. It's a tricky problem. If you're faced with material like that, you've got to say to yourself, if I buy this, can I exhibit it?
Yeah, okay. Got a question from John Scott. Stamp album pages vary. Is a stamp album page an appropriate medium for an exhibit, given that such pages would never be used in museum exhibitions?
No. Well,
So
John, I don't think so.
buy a standard stamp album page?
I don't think so. I mean, you have, well, I was going to say you have no idea. I imagine you have every idea how many different size album pages there are. And not all album pages are material friendly either. So I would not use album pages, mainly I think because you have to take into account the size of frames. And I'm quite exercised by the size of frames. And the number of times, you know, as a commissioner, where you've tried to put pages in a frame and that there is just no way you can do it without damaging something. So if people have chosen to use thin paper and it keeps falling out of the page, out of the frame, or they've chosen to use 30-centimeter high pages, you're going to find yourself in trouble. So I would pick a page size which suited the exhibition frames if you're going to exhibit. If you're not going to exhibit, you can use whatever you like. But you know, I often say that exhibiting isn't part of the real world. It's a pretty artificial construct. So I would say album pages are not going to work in exhibition frames generally.
Okay, got a question from Ian Matheson. I know this will come, as he's saying that some judges are violently opposed to any presentation that is not mounted horizontally. So what's the view of diagonal or vertical presentation? I mean, if you presumably that means if you have a long cover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm one of those judges. So I would try to avoid diagonal mounting wherever possible. And you can do it, you know, because a print on A3, or indeed any size you like up to A3, is easily available now. They're not expensive. They used to be expensive. So you don't have to mount things diagonally. And I would say that unless there are very, very exceptional circumstances, I wouldn't. I think it leaves too much air on the page. I think it's also too different probably from all of the other things, to which I guess you get the question, well, should I mount everything diagonally? And no, I don't think so. I would avoid it. I really would avoid it, and look to your page sizes.
Okay, got a question from Mauricio. What is your opinion regarding the use of maps to show routes in postal history or aerophilately? How large should they be?
Okay, maps. You saw my maps. They're all mine are nearly all hand drawn. I think maps should, ideally, we're talking about postal history, and I think postal history is a branch of history. I think maps should generally be age appropriate. So if I'm showing, you know, material that was posted in the 17th century or 18th century, I'd like to use contemporary maps. I think sometimes a modern map cut out, no doubt, or printed from a modern atlas can look awful on the page. So I guess I'm more use maps, of course. I mean, read the postal history regulations, and they encourage the use of maps. They're not. You should read these regulations. They are really, really, really flexible. Yeah, use maps, but make them age appropriate, and don't make them dominant. Don't forget, what we're talking about here is the material in the frames, the philatelic material, and you don't want to overwhelm it with a whole series of modern maps, for example. So yeah, maps are essential to some exhibits. Use them and choose them wisely.
Right. There's a question from Vince Polisato, USA. He's asking you, do you have any suggestions on presenting covers that read vertically, such as Chinese or Japanese covers, so that they don't become boring when presented page after page throughout an exhibit?
No, it's tricky, isn't it? I've got some Vietnamese revenue pieces, and they're all vertical, and they all have Chinese characters or ideograms in any case. So it's a tricky problem. I've never exhibited them. So I've kind of avoided the problem. I think actually some of this material is extremely attractive, and the fact that it's vertical is simply a fact of life. And I think you have to live with that, and you just have to go with the material. I mean, this is one of the problems, that quite often the material determines how it's going to be displayed. Yeah. And I think if you've got vertical material, you've got no choice. You have to make a virtue of it, and you've got to figure out how to do that for the best. I think they're very, very pretty, some of these things, both from China and Indochina. And I think they can make a very attractive exhibit. Vertical, they will have to be.
Okay. So Rex Dixon would like to know, how bad does presentation have to be to get only 3 points?
It's, you know, it's very rare that it goes. I've never seen a 2.
No.
I've never seen a 2. I mean, see, fundamentally, you're going to get 50% of the points for turning up. So what you're looking at is you're looking at how much can you add to your 50 points. And what did we get for our? I think the lowest I got was 65. But that's before I'd read the rules. I think that judges are not rigorous enough in marking presentation. I think there's nothing wrong with giving somebody 3 points for presentation if it deserves it. And I think we'd improve our presentation and probably our treatment if we were more inclined to give 3 points for presentation. Because, my God, I've seen exhibits of classic and very, very expensive material that, frankly, only deserve 3 points for presentation. And,
absolutely.
And the material tends then to pull the presentation points up. And I don't think we should do that. I think juries, whether they're at local, club, federation, national or international level, should be more inclined to give 3 points where it's due.
Okay, another question from Graham Winters again. He says, on the front page, would you recommend the inclusion of a relevant item, either postal history or relevant to the treatment?
Well, Graham, I can answer that yes or no. I don't think in an 8-frame, I don't think that in a 5-frame exhibit that there's necessarily room to put an item on the front page. I think you should concentrate on getting over your background, your references and sources, and your exhibition structure and treatment. I really do. I think that's much more important. because the jury are going to use these introductory pages to prepare, and they're going to see plenty of material in the books they're looking at. So I think in a 5-frame exhibit, you shouldn't do it. I don't think you've got room. In an 8-frame exhibit, and where you might choose to have 2 pages as an introduction, you might want to do that. I do in some cases, and I don't in others. And really it depends partly on, it's your choice, to be honest. But the key purpose of the introductory page is to introduce the subject and to enable the juror to prepare for the exhibit, judging. So if an item on the front page takes away from your capacity to inform the judge, I think you're making a mistake.
Okay. I think this is I think it's probably a comment from Ian Matheson again. Said PowerPoint gives more flexibility than Word for odd shapes. Do you agree? Never done it by PowerPoint myself.
No, but I've made a lot of PowerPoints. Do you know, I didn't know that. So maybe I should have a look. But actually, you know, you can. There are drawing programs, and there's quite a powerful drawing element in Word. I think what you do is you find the program which suits you best, and you learn to use it to the best of your capacity. And if your material is actually going to be better off presented using PowerPoint or Publisher or whatever, use that. I'm extremely comfortable with Word. I once started to try to learn InDesign, but it's too complicated for my limited intelligence, so I didn't do it. Your choice. And thank you for letting me know. I'll have a go.
Okay. Got a question from Pablo Palazzo. He's asking, what about the use of colored papers in exhibiting instead of white or off-white?
Well, I use a kind of cream. The Caillebotte and Tapling used a sort of greyish green, very pale, a sort of eau de Nil sort of colour. I think for paper, it's got to support your material. It's got to support your exhibit, and it must not dominate the material. So I think you can have any colour you like. Truthfully, black is forbidden. And I once saw a horrible exhibit, a thematic exhibit of volcanoes. I hope the exhibitor's nowhere near here. And they'd done it all on red and yellow paper. And it looked awful. And I'm absolutely certain the exhibitor was immensely proud of it. So I think this is a horses for courses question. And this whole range of pale colours which don't dominate the material. There's plenty of colour out there and plenty of material out there, but I would use something which didn't get in the way of your material, because that's what we're displaying.
Okay. Got a question from Yari Mayanda. It says, long lines across pages tend to be harder to read and understand than shorter lines. Any view on that?
That's true. And there are typefaces which are easier to read than others. And you only have to look at elementary school readability research. Yeah, long lines are a bad idea. Short lines are good. Long sentences are a bad idea. Listen, don't forget that a lot of jurors, how can you, Yari? A lot of jurors are not native English speakers, and you really shouldn't use long sentences or expensive words in writing your stuff up. It needs to be accessible, readable, clear, and it needs to be concise. This doesn't mean you can't use a lot of short sentences, but long sentences and long lines they're an impediment. They damage readability. You're quite right, and I would avoid them if you can.
Okay. A question from Graham again. What would Chris regard as being too much writing on a page?
I don't know, but I know it when I see it.
Okay.
Listen, Graham, you know perfectly well that people think I write too much. And when I start getting 65 points again, I'll start paying attention. It's your choice, you know. Right, as I said, right at the very beginning, you've got to make a decision. I think that these heading boxes and story boxes at the top of the page are the key, because then they allow the juror to read as much of the write-up as you choose. But they're not going to read that stuff because they don't have time. So you've got to help the jury judge your exhibit, and you use these running headers, you know, the chapters and so on, to help. I'm sorry to answer the same answer again, but you know, it's your choice here. And jurors are different, and jurors will also say one thing and do another. They will tell you that it's too much writing, but you'll still get 90 points. You know.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it's not an exact science. You know, this isn't physics.
Okay. From a question from Richard Hobbs. If two certificates, expert certificates, exist for an item, one being genuine and the other fraudulent, how should these be recorded or mentioned on the page?
That's a really good question, because I've got a piece which I've never shown because it's got two good certificates and one bad one. So I mean, what I've finally done is sent it off to see if I can get another good one. I think what you've got to do is you've got to be honest. I mean, for example, I had a piece which had been heavily marked in modern times with Indian ink, you know, this very corrosive black, what's that? No, Indian ink. And what they'd done was they'd strengthened a postmark. And I had that cleaned off because it was otherwise unpresentable. And I had a certificate made for it before I had it cleaned. And then I had a certificate saying that it had been cleaned. And I present it. And I say in my text precisely that I've had it, it's been restored, in fact. I've had the piece restored to the way in which it probably was 20 years ago before somebody got at it with a pen. And I've shown it. So I think it depends really on the importance of the piece you're showing. If it's unique, or if it's very, very rare, or if it's essential to take your story forward, I think you simply tell the truth.
Okay, right. Got a question from Hugh Osborne. Ask you, please expand on when for an 8-frame exhibit, 2 pages plan is a better option.
Oh, Hugh, I don't think I can answer that question. I think it depends partly on the complexity of your story. You know, if you're telling a really complicated tale, you know, it's a story around shifting frontiers over a long period of time, or whatever, or a complex series of routes or rates in an exhibit, you may be forced to use 2 pages. I use 2 introductory pages in 2 of my exhibits, and I use 1 page in 2 others. And it's simply because I need the 2 pages to introduce the exhibit properly. So I think it depends on what you're showing, and you won't get a straight answer from me on this, I'm sorry.
Okay, so we come to the next question, Rex Dixon. He says, do you need to be honest that a cover is only a front?
Yep, so it's a front.
You have to write it. Okay.
Yep.
Now, I think Henrik wants to make a short comment. So, Henrik, can you unmute yourself?
I knew he was going to be irresistible.
No. It has nothing to do with that. I just wanted to comment on the new regulations that the Commission is going to vote on very soon. This color question that came earlier, in the past, it said nothing about color. It just said it shouldn't overwhelm the material. But in the new harmonized regulations, and that means it's already saying so in postal stationery and traditional, it says you should use a light color that doesn't overwhelm the material or something like that. So the new regulations do actually forbid anything like a bright blue, bright red, black, and so on. It's not forbidden now, but in the revised ones that we are going to vote on at some stage, it's mentioned specifically. And the only other thing I wanted to comment on is that this with no material on pages. We see quite a few postal history exhibits where there are 5 or 10 pages in the exhibit with no material. I think it's advisable to say that the title page can be without material, but no other page should be without material.
Yeah.
That was all.
Otherwise, you're going to be accused of showing half an exhibit. I mean, I've seen, again, I saw one of Ottoman Empire, very rare material, but one piece on every page. And I just wanted to know where the other half was. And they said, well, there isn't any. So I said, well, it's an unfortunate choice for an exhibit then. And, you know, it's a problem. What I would say, since we've got Krakow here, is that it would be really, really useful if it was possible to get these harmonized regulations agreed. And if we can get 75 people together on a Zoom event here today, I'm sure you can get enough people from a bureau together to vote on this. I really think it's important. We could be still in trouble in 12 months' time, and I think we need to move these things on. I'm very much support these harmonized regulations.
Okay, I think Istan Glatz has been raising his hands for a long time. So would you want to ask your question, Mr. Glatz?
Isfan.
Yeah, Isfan.
Where are you?
He's been raising a hand for a long time. Anyway, okay, he might come back to us. Anyway, I've got another question from Andrea Mori. Suppose that your exhibit covers a period of time when changes of postal rates have occurred. Is it a good idea to start each chapter with a preamble with tables showing the postal rates treated? And even if that steals some space for items?
Well, yes, I'm just about to start on such an exhibit, and it's going to be in frames probably in 12 months' time. And I think I have to do that because otherwise I can't carry the treatment forward properly. So I would say, depending on the exhibits, on its subject and scope, you need to do what you need to do to carry your exhibit forward. But I'm very much with Henrik. There should be no page without material unless it's the introductory page. So if you can meet those requirements, and you can have your tables as kind of chapter headings through the exhibit, well then go for it. I think in some exhibits, particularly rate exhibits, it's probably helpful. In fact, it might even be essential.
Okay, the next question comes from Rob Marion. Would you like to unmute yourself, please? Yes, there it is.
69.
Yes. Rob?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I seem to feel there's sometimes a conflict in exhibiting for the public and exhibiting for judges, in the sense that we would include or not include certain comments or material. What comment would you have on that?
Well, I'd say that's true. I think that you have to find ways of making that not true. I don't think we get our exhibits a wide enough audience. Now, I don't think we're going to attract people off the streets to come to a philatelic exhibition, but I do think that we can attract historians and researchers in other fields to look at what we're doing. And I think I would try to make my exhibit as widely attractive as I can, and don't compromise. As I said earlier on, it's your choice, but you've put it in a competition, and there are rules, and there are judges. So you want to try and get the best of both worlds, really, and that can be quite tricky. But you know, if you look at, I mean, Henrik did a how to get a large gold medal talk with our Indian colleagues, and you actually have to focus on how to get points if you want to get points. Now, some people put material into exhibits because they simply want it seen. My wife Beata is one of those. She puts material up because she's got a story she wants to tell. Right. So it's that the same answer again. You know, it's your choice, and it's what do you want out of this? Do you want a large gold medal? Do you want a Grand Prix? Do you want to get your story over? Well, ideally, we want to do all of the above, but you may have to compromise. Try not to.
Yep, very, very tough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So,
no, pleasure.
Any more?
I'm not necessarily right.
Any more questions? Yes, we got another question from Fernando Prato. For the 2C exhibits, would you recommend using different fonts for historical texts and the philatelic ones? What about the length of both?
I exhibit in 2C and I don't do that. I can see absolutely no reason why you shouldn't. So it's really, it's down to you. Again, it's what you're suggesting is a perfectly reasonable approach to writing a history-based, if you like, exhibit, a 2C or a sociologically based exhibit. Tell your story. And they do that in thematic philately. So you know, you can use one text for the thematic story, and one text for the postal, the philatelic story, if you like. So yeah, nothing wrong with doing that. Try it and see.
Okay. Now I think I missed a question. Yes, from Mr. PC Shaw. He says, what would be the best font, a 10, 11, or 12, and the style of the letters?
I try to get everything at 12 points. I mean, I've only got one eye, you know, and the other one's fading. and I think that 12 is easier to read, but I'd be interested to know what other people thought. I think you go for 12 point, and I don't like, personally, I don't think that a wide variety of fonts or fancy fonts improve readability. So I would avoid them. This is all about readability. I mean, what you want to do is to write a page up and then go and present it to somebody who's not a philatelist and say, can you read that? And does it make sense? I mean, that's actually, you know, it's a really good idea to get other people to look at your stuff before you put it in an exhibition. And I don't think we do enough of that. It may be that our significant others, our partners, are not philatelists and they're not interested. But you can find someone to answer that question. Is this easy to read? And see what people say.
Okay. Any more questions from the floor?
No, time.
Okay, so right, I see that as the numbers are going down, I think yes, it's time for me to give a vote of thanks to the speaker, Chris. You have actually give us a fantastic talk on presentation, very technical. I mean, but I think that you know, it just makes it so wonderful and so easy to understand if you just look at an exhibit. I thank Chris for doing that and teaching us, you know, what you have done, and we really appreciate that. And I also like to thank, of course, the FIP for hosting the talk, the seminar, and of course Kelly, you know, being so helpful, setting up all the links,
yep.
And of course, in all the participants, and then as I say, I mean, this will be this has been recorded, and it will be placed on the FIP website at a later date. Well, I mean, I would say stay tuned for the next meeting in a fortnight. Oh, Chris.
Yeah, I just want to say, just very, very quickly, to say thank you to everybody for turning up, because without this, I'd have been talking to nobody. So I'm grateful for your attendance. I'm very grateful to Kelly and to Prakob for giving us the forum for this presentation. And thank you very much indeed, Andrew, and your colleagues on the Bureau for their invitation for me to present this. Thanks very much indeed.
Yeah. Okay,
well.
So well, and have a nice morning, noon, or evening, and stay tuned till next time. See you next time. Okay.